Good evening. Many, many years ago, I think we could say that Archigram effectively started in this building. It certainly had its first ever exhibition here, and of the euphemous Archigram group, everybody taught here at some point or other. And I'm delighted to say that 60 years on nearly, many of the contributors to this new Archigram 10 are actually sitting in the room. So in a sense, my three guests this evening, not exactly picked with a pin, but you may, when you've heard them, realize why I thought it was particular that they should represent the rest of the contributors here this evening. First off, though, we sadly lost one of the original members of Archigram, somebody not only special to our little coterie, but very special to this particular institution. Many of the books and pamphlets and boxed sets and so on that you see next door in the bookshop were really created by Dennis, very much together with the late Albin Boyarsky. But more than that, Dennis was actually not necessarily the one that was most publicized or the one that was most treated as a sort of guru figure, but he was really the salt of the earth as far as Archigram was concerned, a very true man. And in fact, as I have often said before and since, the keeper of the flame, he has kept an enormous archive up in Primrose Hill and kept the connections between the flame of Archigram and all sorts of people all over the world. And I think I have to start on this rather sad note that he died less than 2 weeks ago. But to just give a bit of background, for those of you, I can see a lot of familiar faces and people who do know what Archigram was, and that it spanned many years, and it started off on the top left-hand side as a very crude pamphlet with a funny picture of lots of funny schemes next to it. It then developed through a period of interest in expendability. It immediately incorporated other friends around town and elsewhere, particularly people like Cedric Price, who appeared in many of the issues. And then in what I would call the middle period, numbers say 4 to 6, it included quite a lot of sort of what would loosely be called research work, or reference to other people in other places and at other times who were interested in the things that we were interested in, including people who used to draw pictures for the American comic papers, or strange people somewhere in the eastern parts who made megastructure cities or things that look like pyramids. And then through in Archigram 6, the research that Warren Chalk did into a period where he, being the oldest, would remember, which was the extraordinary things that happened in invention during the 1940s. And then through an issue largely talking about the computer, through to an issue talking about the popular pack, and through to number 9, which I think owes a lot to David Greene, who I'm delighted to say is sitting in the second row there somewhere, and still with us. And he made a very special, the beginning of his activities, which still continue here today in the which under the name of LAWUN, Locally Available World Unseen Networks. And that has become a sort of life's work on his part. But to move forward, why is there another Archigram? I think the bottom line is that there's such a lot of dreary, po-faced, boring, uninventive, tedious, self-seeking, do-gooding, nasty work that somebody has to, finally, one was just wanting to explode. Like, fuck, enough is enough is enough is enough. And so the great optimistic word of Archigram was cheerful. While I live and stand, I want to be fucking cheerful. To hell with the others, whatever their virtues. And so Archigram 10 starts off on that on that note, and there's a sort of subnote which I think is important, which talks about drawing. The drawings are exciting, can be wayward, can be very precise, can be prescient. Doodles are, in fact, a spontaneous link to much of this. And maybe Archigram is one collective doodle. And I put up that proposition, and I sort of put in small letters. Wouldn't mind, in fact. I rather like it. So I have reconstituted the sequence that you will find when you've purchased your copies of the new Archigram into a slightly different order, just to make it a little bit simpler. I think experiment has always been underlying the work of Archigram. Some of you know this person's work. He's put some recent things in. They are neither machines nor are they instruments for painting. They are robots, but not really robots. They exist in an in-between territory where he some years ago started investigating the stomach and then seems to have moved on to things that move around in this town. Today he's often in the States, but he would be one of the most young thinking people I know still at the age of whatever he is, not the oldest. Michael Webb, one of the still alive and kicking and drawing, and actually the piece that he put in to Archigram was a new piece. And of course, we couldn't resist. If you look closely at this picture, we have a segment of one of his apocryphal, very detailed paintings. He always accompanies his sort of philosophical and mathematical explorations with the art of making the thing look like something and very precise, which is almost a sort of dying instinct. The house remains a preoccupation also. The house is still a territory for invention. And we have a strange mixture of people, a lady who's rather shy and I think never comes to any of our events, but did a wonderful house a few years ago, which I could not resist including, the Orchard House. A working architect in London who does sort of do-gooding things in the eastern part of London, but this is still my favorite project. And Gavin, who's sitting in the front row corner there, who is also very in the great drawing tradition and still investigating the issue of the house. The house is, of course, a theme of our friend Neil Denari, and he again produced this particular house project, especially for this issue of Archigram. Florencia Pitta, who is on the faculty of SCIARC and from Argentina, does very, very weird shit when you see her and her students work at SCIARC. But then when you boil it down, she's also examining what she can do with this attached to the idea of the house. So it's curious bedfellows, all still thinking about the house. And I've always said that, you know, you invent a non-house in order to reinvestigate the house. Marcos Cruz. I've also included some things that some of these people who have actually constructed alongside what happens to be in the magazine, just to try and bed them into things that you might have seen. They explore space waiting to be explored. And Thomas Saraceno, who was way back a student of mine at the Städelschule in Frankfurt, is now, of course, very known for his installations, which are still toying with the idea of an architectural proposition, though he doesn't admit it. Marion Coletti, who's well known to many of you in the room, I think he's in Switzerland right now, and he also is somebody who is intrigued by the proposition of the house if you dig deep into his work. Cesare Bettelli, who also claims to be a student of mine, and I can't remember him, but I didn't round him up for that. I was fascinated by the stuff that I kept seeing on the internet, and I simply invited him. But he now says, "Oh, I was your student." Maybe he was, but no matter. Hernandez Alonso, who of course is known now as an educator, as they say in America, as well as a sort of digital wizard and sometimes producing stuff that looks more like something you see in a butcher shop than you would see in polite circles. I then noticed that in this particular issue of Archigram, there's much more, it's larger than the old Archigrams would have been, but it also is full of chit-chat. I think that's a big difference in the last 55 years, that 55 years ago, we wouldn't have bothered with too much chit-chat, except the necessary words that somebody like David or Warren would use almost in a poetic sense, in a declamatory sense, rather than sort of descriptive. Now everybody is descriptive. And then, of course, the question is, the commentator, his or herself. I have chosen to bypass the rather crabby English critics, of whom one eminent one happens to be in the audience today. And I said, well, you're the least. I didn't put the slide in. It's in my Manchester edition, but I think that therefore I deliberately asked 4 Americans and a Belgian sitting here to make some general comments. I deliberately bypassed the English critics. So I find sort of the best you get is faint praise, and mostly you get a sort of, you should be doing something more useful or more meaningful or more worthy or more whatever. So fuck them. So I move on. And I'm interested in architects who are notable builders, such as Tom Main, who also now in most of his day's work is concentrating upon these invented pieces. Sometimes they're 3-dimensional. These happen to be flat, computer generated, and they're really artworks. Some of the 3-dimensional ones, of course, examine urban propositions, and you can make a link between the 3D material and something that he's done in China. But in a sense, he's become nearer and nearer to being, dare I say it, a fine artist. But that might be another conversation for another day. And on the opposite page, I deliberately put Odile Decq with this beautiful, beautiful piece, which again was done particularly for this issue of the magazine. I'm fascinated by Tom and Odile, who are people who have put up lots and lots of great buildings, but choose also to step aside from just dealing with hardware. The Tezukas, who I think you've probably met in London, they lectured somewhere here recently, who have this famous school, this famous rotating schools. They are still examining and proposing and building more original schools, and some of them in very awkward parts of the mountains. And then investigating the ocean city. So Ecologic Studio, who can't be here this evening, they're in Turin today, but they do a lot of things which I know many people here know, but also they are looking into the urban implications of their biomorphic work, which is an intriguing direction to move into. Pedro Pitar, who I would love to invite this, I was reminded this evening that really he ought to be here this evening, probably the least known of any of the people, and I think one of the most brilliant designers and drawers. He seems to be restricted to Madrid these days, but I think I've been saying for about 5 years, he's the one to watch. So remember the name Pedro Pitar, and believe the compositions if you will. And he's always coming second in competitions, which I think is an extremely good recommendation. People's Architecture Office, who did famously the bicycles with the exploding umbrellas, who many people who I know have said, their drawings look a little bit like Archigram, like direct Archigram rather than sort of 60 years on Archigram, which could be another conversation. Helen and Harder, interestingly, again, rather in parallel, they are very, very different from Ecologic Studio up there in Stavanger. They normally do fascinating things with folded wood and cut wood and making trees into built objects. But here they again are looking at the possibilities of the city. It's interesting, these people we think of as dealing usually with small-scale investigations or experiments, wanting to apply that to the city. And maybe there's a throwback there, because I think that's probably what we were sort of, you know, there was no dividing line between something that's that big or purporting to be that big and something that might stretch across London. Have I skipped somebody? No, continue. So continuing exploration of substance, it's interesting that Izaskin Chinchilla talks about black and white, the significance of black and white, as an architect who's probably does the most colorful objects in reality. And is also very interesting, again, as the Americans would say, educator. Ricardo and Nanette. Ricardo is one of those extraordinary creatures who is the equivalent of a cross-dresser. That means he teaches both at the A and the Bartlett. Whoops. I think they're now beginning to build some of this stuff in Indonesia. Vinca, who is a very important New York architect, was actually representing us together with Barry Walk in New York 3 nights ago, where there was an Archigram event. And Vinca is, of course, again, one of these people who is a significant building architect, has been a very significant educator, and is also an experimenter. Ilana Manfredini, again at SCI-Arc, is an expert in the potential of surface and layering. And Gilles, again, he pops up twice, honored position. He and Barry Walk do in the magazine a conversation between the two of them, the one offering one sort of version of a project, the other quite a different, and the discussion between, and they do this, I think, back and forth 5 times during the process of the article. Sille, who's sitting in the front here, is going to speak for herself, is one of those interesting animals, which I think there should be more of. In fact, there are these 2 ladies sitting here who are both heads of schools, but both heads of schools who do stuff. How many heads of architecture schools do stuff? Don't answer, it wouldn't take very long to answer. And I'm delighted to say Tonkin Liu, for whom I have an increasing respect, and also apply their stuff to buildings, not only ideas. They're here this evening to greet you. For Malhout, who were some Frankfurt friends who really hover between being installation artists and architects. They are actually architects and occasionally do buildings, but they seem to, maybe they just get more stuff. Maybe it's their bent is to move more and more towards installations. They've taken over a whole village somewhere near Frankfurt, if you want to go and look at it. Klein Dytham, who again intrigued me and amused me. And then the question of discovery by drawing. Back to that theme of drawing. Perry Kulper, of course, who is an extraordinary maker of drawings. They're always exploratory, and he bombards the internet with his drawings over and over and over again. But there's always something there we say, yes, I think I've seen that one, but there's always something you hadn't noticed. And what I like is the inconsequentiality of his work, that it's the unlike against the unlike against the unlike, which is a difficult thing to handle. And Mark West, who was originally the man known for doing all these hanging pieces of concrete in Canada, who's moved more and more towards making drawings. These are some of his physical hangings that he had when he had the Research Institute in Manitoba. And one of his recent drawings, which get extremely, again, it's almost the unlike, but it's in a different direction from Perry. David Garcia, who is a man who is also an academic to some extent in Copenhagen, but he works a lot in extreme environments. He's building in Greenland, which not very many people do, and he takes his students and he investigates always difficult places. This happens to be Chernobyl, but usually the places are in the Arctic or the Antarctic. Smout and Allen, are they here this evening? No, but I think they're well known in town. They have been for many years looking at the idea of terrain and what can happen to terrain as it changes, as it metamorphoses. And the last one in here, virtually, is Taki Suzuki, just a lovely weirdo. David, I'm delighted, is here. And again, there's not much text in his, but it's very pithy when you read it. And there's me. I'm doing a lot of other stuff besides the mag, so there you are. The great optimistic archigrammic word is cheerful, to which I pass on immediately to Odile.
So this is a drawing that I have in the Archigram 10, and this is just a mistake. This drawing is a mistake. We were working on a project, and I was sitting close to the people in my office who was doing the project, and on the computer, and I don't do computer. I don't know how to do it. And then suddenly the computer, the file did a bug. And the bug was very interesting. I said, stop, I take feature, take again. So this is one of them, a bug on a project. So this is a drawing, and this is a project. I don't know what it is. Doesn't matter. And where I have to, okay. So Peter asked me to show my project. Okay, this is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Rome that some of you maybe already knows. So it's really working on with keeping the facade that I had, and that I had to keep the facade because I want to build. But it's working inside as a promenade, different layering of space in different layers in vertical, and playing with yes, a promenade through a museum to discover the piece of art, to discover everything, bringing light in a black building inside, but out, and having an auditorium which is bright inside when it was matte outside, and the exhibition room. So I have to do fast. I don't explain anything because it's 15 minutes for everything, and I put too many slides. So okay. So this is a roof where we have painting the neighbors in white to make projection on them, and toilets. I love to speak about toilets in my lectures because toilets are very. I have to tell to the students who are there. Toilets is very interesting because you can experiment in toilets, because nobody gives you regulation for that. So this is a space where you can just have dimension. You have to take a bit of ventilation and light. That's it. So you can do whatever you want. So the toilets in the museum are a block of stainless steel mirrored. In the middle, in the central place, you have a block of glass white, and a landscape above. And when you want to go to wash your hands, you go there, and you manipulate your hands above the block. And as soon as you manipulate your hands above the block, it becomes red, and the water is coming up, and the dryer is coming up. So this is a place where the visitors are becoming actors. It's a place for being, and they smile when they get out. So this is why it's joyful. Another museum in China this time. It's a big museum for the Homo erectus, the first one of the first one. And it's in Nanjing, and this is playing with the curved line of the site, because it's a landscape project, it's a building, but it's a landscape at the same time. And this is a model that we did in papers, and then it becomes a museum. And the building is inserted in the landscape, and the landscape is going on to the museum. And inside there is a atrium, which is playing with the space, making people turning around to discover what is exhibited around. Last project is by Tower in Barcelona. I renovated, no, it was not built, it was just a concrete skeleton remaining on the border of the sea, of Mediterranean, and to make it higher because it was too small. So we had to add more floors above, to create new foundation, to create new balconies everywhere, so reinforce the structure a lot, to bring the tower to that, which is, because it was a square which was not regular, so I did a very sinuous system of lines for the balconies with making twisting in a way, like that. Every floor is different. Every floor has different balconies which are different. And the ground floor is very high, 10 meters high, with inside the mirror on the top, so you don't see where is the real height, because the height is at the middle of, no, 2/3 of the top of the slide, and what you see above is in the mirror. So the space become 20 meters in perceptions. And in that building, I call it the global design, because I designed everything. I not only designed the architecture, I designed the furniture, I designed the lamps, I designed the health center down, which is 1,000 square meters in wood, with a yoga room, which is going to the sky in the garden, a swimming pool under the roof, the ramp of the car park, but covered underneath by a mirror that when you swim inside, you are swimming in between and looking at you swimming in the swimming pool. But if you go to the top part of the tower, which is 100 meters high, there is another swimming pool, which is an infinite swimming pool connected to the sky, to the sea, which is turning around the building. And we have duplexes. And when I said I design everything, if you look at the staircase, I designed the steps, I designed the door handles, I designed the bathtub, I designed the kitchen island, the stairs, everything. This is all done by me, by myself. And even the signage. Okay, and the restaurant, okay, on the ground floor, with designing the seat, the table, the lamps, which is a kind of a chandelier, a kind of a suspension, which is like a mirror in 3D, and the toilets again. So many toilets sometimes. But sometimes I do a little house. This is the artist residence in Grenoble, in the east, south in the Alps. And it's a little black wooden house, close to the manor, with the owner of the manor is a big art collector, and she wanted to have an artist residence. So this is a black box in front of the Alps and overlooking to Grenoble, and twisting the object to provide light and provide sun from different directions inside, because it's very little, because the space is down a workshop, above little spaces with a living room, a bedroom, and a belvedere at the top to overlook the landscape. No, it's not mine. Okay, half of the time it goes too fast. Okay, so now I'm quiet. So, and this is a black wooden house, and I did a white glass house in Brittany, which is for an English guy who was macular illness, and he couldn't. He knows that he couldn't see in the time, so he wanted to have a total light house inside with no differences about the light inside. So everything has to have the same quantity of light. So this is glass only, the walls and the roof, and this is a bit inclined. And inside everything is inclined, and the light is everywhere the same. This is like being in a cocoon, because you don't understand where you are, and you are outside of the world when you're inside. And also because it's oblique, everything is dancing. I know that he sold it now, and it's becoming Airbnb. Can you imagine that? I heard that 3 months ago. And in the same city, on the beach, I did another house, which is the little one, the little glass part that you see in between the fake fortification and the old houses. And this is a place where I couldn't go up because the people who were living above didn't want to have a view hidden by the house. So I had to maintain the house inside the place, inside the garden. and we covered the roof with stones, and the facade is all in glass. So this is a stone roof above glass house, again. And with a little patio inside, overlooking 360 degrees to the sea, which is not bad, and with 2 different floors, 2 different levels. And we designed the sofa to have a possibility to sit there, to lie here, to overlook the sea. And this is, sometimes I do art piece. So this is a mobile that I have a lot, but I just show you that, which is a kind. So it's coming from a drawing, a plan, a master plan of a building. And this is one of the drawings I did long time ago. And this is a suspension which can mobile and turn to be a suspension, a piece of art. Sometimes I do design. This is a dog basket, because I renovated the art gallery close to my office, and the owner, had a dog and wanted to bring back the dog basket in the art gallery, and I said no way, because this is always ugly. That I will design the dog basket. So I went to visit the dog, take measure of when he was sitting, lying, and standing, and we did a measure, a real bubble, and with asking a lady in the surround to knit, to sew a mattress, and we brought that to Victor, and Victor was living there for 12 years. Now he died. I'm sorry for him, but he died. And I do sometimes lamps. Also, this is one of the, not the last one, but the previous lamp, which is a suspension that I'm working with Lichteplan, and they asked me a suspension. This is an indirect light underneath. And the last one is, I received the video of it 2 weeks ago, so it's very new. It's a chandelier with just candles, only candles. It's quite huge because it's nearly 2 meters long. But it's, and Peter asked me to speak a little bit about my school. So my school is Confluence Institute, that I launched now 10 years, nearly 11 years ago, in Lyon first, and moved back to Paris in the 2019. And it's why to create a new school? It's because I was not happy with the fact that in the pedagogy, because I was thinking that the pedagogy in School of Architecture has to change a lot. Because the students that we have in front of us are not at all the same. I started to teach in the 90s, and I saw a difference in the 2000, and then now it's totally different. You are all different than us. First of all, you are not drawing by hand so much. You are not doing models so much. You are only fascinated by your computers. You think that you have, the first drawing is the end, or you have to develop and to search and to be able to do more and more and more, to create and to understand what you are doing and to go further. And also you are not memorizing so much because you don't read. Yes, I know. You don't read, so you don't think, excuse me. And you are not able to write. This is a problem. And this is my main problem since I think about that since 1 year and 1.5 years, because of the AI. Because if you want to use AI, you have to be able to write. And for writing, you have to be able to think, so you have to you have to read. And because if you want to write something that you ask to the AI, and the AI is providing something which is a compilation of something which was before. Because AI is just you compiling data, and because you have this data are for before, they are not in front of you, they are behind you. So this is postmodern. So because this is postmodern, you have to be able to discuss with the AI, and for discussing, to rephrase what do you want, and rephrase and rephrase and rephrase until the AI is doing what you want. But because you don't know at the beginning what do you want. When you do a project in architecture, you have an idea, but you don't know precisely what it is. So the AI is giving you something, but this is not the end. You have to re-ask, and rephrase. And because you have to rephrase, you have to write, and you have to be able to think and to have to be self-critical about the AI is proposing to you. So this is the main challenge of schools of architecture today. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Really happy to be here and really happy to see that many people in this room. Peter didn't tell me what I should talk about. So it's actually a continuation of a short writing that is in the book. And this huge believer that infrastructure is territory for architects. I assembled a sort of an essay with images to walk through tonight with you. I believe that infrastructure plays a crucial role in shaping rural and urban landscapes, which Archigram knew already half a century ago. Yet it still consists of unremarkable engineered elements, lacking architectural distinction. Architecting infrastructure explores the potential in these structures, becoming part of placemaking and points of identity, taking into account rationalization, resilience, and relatability. Architecting, the term coined way before me, it refers to more holistic and systematic approach that is necessary to intervene already working system and allow multiple pivot points rather than just one. For instance, the power transmission lines, typically mundane and uniform, possesses a capacity to transform into emblematic symbols within the environments, becoming the symbol of energy independence from Eastern neighbor, for example, where every new independent transmission line hosts at least one of those POC characters from the design pylon family. The world in its transition towards fossil-free energy resources, where the times of transmission infrastructure is bound to increase, these new design landmarks should carry also the mentality of it. They could be, aside visually more pleasing structures, also structurally more efficient, reducing the material weight in considerable amounts from this structure being developed since Eiffel Tower to the structure that we developed in 2016. And these characters cannot be just on the background of our landscapes. They should be in the foreground on architects' desks. And they should allow these integrated design aspirations, being it minimal, distinctive, artistic, be part of how we systematically and holistically design our power infrastructure. Aside transmitting power, we have possibility also to better transform and transmit people. Pedestrian tunnels, more welcoming and safe, could elevate the usage of pedestrian and bicycling movement. From bridges to tunnels to roads to stairs, these continuous surfaces connect neighborhoods, and allow safe highway crossings from all the modes of transport. The monotonous vistas can be enlivened by strategically placed, aesthetically pleasing structures that celebrate collapse of multi-level transportation nodes. For every speed, there is a different structure, thus making the slowness actually interesting again. And of course, not every use or usage can be predicted. Thus, the cultural landscape could gain from this abstracted infrastructure as well, and form a playfulness and creative surfaces to be used. When asking, could architecture be hidden inside of the thinnest layer of its existence, the insulation layer, and asking if there's a possibility of transforming massive homogeneous structures into more heterogeneous environments. And we believe, yes, there is a way of keeping the layering of these 60 years and could turn this into more humane scales, introducing the in-between layers and better possibilities for living together. And could those layers cover the Soviet housing blocks, where almost 1/3 of us in Eastern Europe live in? Could we create new worlds in outdoor space, connections, and new territories for living to be considered? And these inhabitable in-between spaces could enliven and better the life qualities in large quantities, adding new buffer zones and more human scale modules that I consider osmotic modularity. Thus, infrastructure for cityscapes to rural, from cityscapes to rural landscapes could have significant opportunity for architectural distinction, dismantled into human scale, providing stronger communities and identifying the idea of placemaking. So infrastructure is a matter of design, and architecting it is the art of balancing rationalization, resilience, and relatability. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so basically Peter's dedication in the volume was, your elements in this are memorable, let's have more. So I took that to structure my talk. There's one part about memorable and then one part about more. My work is really all about elements, and there's a kind of an interesting question why, and I think that ultimately starts with when I was a child, when I was somewhere around 6 years old, I became 2 times the champion Lego building in Belgium. That's still, until now, the high point of my life. Ever since, I've been on a desperate search to find the same joy back of arriving in this Lego store and being able to literally choose everything, right? And so that led me ultimately to a kind of architectural practice that is, on the one hand, an experimental practice, purely optimistic exploration, inquisitive, of playing around with this essentially really, really boring idea of parts. But then that also led to another form of practice, which is actually a technology company with an extremely vast mission to build a housing platform, a new industrial complex for construction. So let's start here. Let's start first with why these parts are memorable. And I think it's interesting. I'm actually really attracted, and maybe it's very not typical for the other people in the Archigram volume. I'm actually really fascinated by this primordial, boring kind of ideas. And I think my superpower is making them actually exciting. And one of the kind of most dire and sad architectural ideas, I think, is truly modularity. No one wants to be an architect designing like modular buildings. It always ends up being, it's kind of like the death of architecture. It's kind of 0 degree. But I was attracted by that, right? I was like, what if you could actually make it exciting, right? And that's really where that kind of game of parts came from. And ultimately, this is a modular structure. There are 3 different parts in that. And it just kind of pixelates the space and explores, remains open-ended, and is not this kind of deterministic area. The same thing with this, you could say, this is a very simple building. It has 3 parts, right? So it's really interesting that in my work, there's this kind of continuous exploration of how digital technology could really help us rethink what parts are, what the primordial substance of architecture is, and also in my own world, kind of how low can you go, right? In a kind of in a funny way. And I think it's really important, as Archigram is all about drawings, to also actually talk a bit about drawings. And for me, this drawing by Agnes Martin is actually the kind of the precedent for a lot of my work. I was always really attracted to this because it's at the same time about very little and about a lot, right? It's this kind of a drawing as an assembly. It's very machinic, very computational. So I did something similar in my early work after graduating from this place, actually, where I was just programming algorithms to just do these drawings for me non-stop, distributing thousands and thousands of elements without actually having to do much myself. So this is a kind of a version of that where you see kind of a strange spaghetti of elements that come together and that distribute. Ultimately, for me, the kind of the form around that was unimportant. They're always just squares. Like, I just don't design the actual form. It's more distributed that agency is giving to the parts themselves. So this is literally just Agnes Martin's drawing in 3D with an algorithm on top. And that brings me to my other kind of fascination, which is, yes, this kind of radical, primordial, the lowest degree that you can almost go, right? And like I have a real fascination with Malevich, actually has many architects, which is very strange because it's that kind of the 0 degree, right? And it also is a fundamental contradiction, which I also like this idea that you can't paint abstraction because you're working with paint, which is a material. So when I work with AI, actually the 2 Maleviches there on the side are actually AI generated, which is also kind of a weird thing. Like, a lot of other people, obviously, who work with AI will do this kind of extreme explorations of some kind of sci-fi looking strange shapes and forms. And for me, it was like, let's try to do a square with an AI and let's see how it kind of fails and struggles with that, which I think is a much more interesting question. Or again, another reference, of course, Clifford Still, which again is this kind of negotiation of the problem of abstraction with the materiality of paint. And then that's actually what I draw. I actually have never shown this. This is not in Archigram, but I do draw. Although I program computers and I build things with robots, I do draw. But when I draw, what I draw is actually kind of strange distributions of materials in squares, like slightly defined squares, right? And I do this, like, I will very much call them doodles, like the word that was mentioned before. I do them without thinking nonstop. So when I doodle, I distribute elements, I distribute parts or materials. And then sometimes those become designs, like in this case, again, this is actually probably the 3D version of the kind of the Clifford Still that I showed before, which is a building that, again, consists just of a relentless repetition of the same element that then kind of forms these jagged edges and that builds something very at the same time familiar and at the same time kind of new and unseen. And that ultimately led to something in my work that I really like, which is this design for a simple log cabin, which has these qualities of being at the same time primitive and unseen, of being familiar with these 2 slabs, which is almost, that's also something I like, right? Like, it's the most boring architectural idea. It's like just two horizontal planes and trying to understand how they connect each other. But then that's all negotiated through kind of a really quite strange decision that it should all be done with the same part, right? And like, that sets up this kind of negotiation with materiality, logistics, and this kind of 0 degree of architecture. And then the work then had to be materialized relentlessly. So any opportunity to try and build this and figure out how you could actually build this at cost and out of materials that don't hurt the planet anymore, that was then driving the work. And that actually first materialized in Sille's hometown in Tallinn for the Tallinn Architecture Biennale. And then that led more and more to a kind of a rationalization of these systems and an understanding that we could actually just build this and that it doesn't cost any more than any other buildings. And that through working through this strange understanding of parts in a digital way, that suddenly we could do quite exciting things that are fundamentally really simple and boring and that also don't have to cost more than anything else. And that was also what was driving the teaching at this other place, this other architecture school on the other side of Bloomsbury, where with my students we were investigating how this ecologies of parts could lead to real housing platforms, how they could really help us to rethink how we built housing at a large scale, how we could mobilize robots, etc. And then in my practice, again, through doing competitions and actually always being the second, as Peter mentioned, that's a classic thing. The one who wins the second prize is usually the best one. So I take that with pride. And really kind of scaling this up to being really rational and buildable, but having this kind of core idea. Like this one I also really like. It's just a simple shed. So the previous one is just a simple box. Again, it's a provocation. Anyone, why would you program computers to do a box, right? I think that's actually much more interesting than trying to do something different, right? I think that's an interesting provocation. And then this one is basically just a simple shed, which again is a purely modular, really simple system of very thin timber sheets. And then if you drive this to the limits, you can obviously go to Donald Judd and really kind of start to say like, well, why do these boxes look so strange? Why don't we just make them simple elements? And then that then leads to this, which I think really shows the kind of the power of being able with something very boring to make something really exciting and unexpected, which are these two, which are built with the same parts, literally a kind of a super big Lego. These are architectural models on a scale of 1 to 3. So you just need to make it 3 times bigger and you have a building. And then ultimately leads to this, which is maybe the kind of 0 degree of something that I would still call is like my thing, but that is really, really driven to that limit. And then when you sketch it, it's something like this, right? Like these are the kind of underlying doodles that I relentlessly make of that. And then the industrial model is that, right? So the industrial model is the kind of the provocation that this could be a kind of new standard or new domino. So that leads me to let's have more. So we did this memorable part. And then my big question, I was always more interested in the question of how we can practice architecture in large quantities than small quantities. So for me, I was always more interested in the question, can you do 5 houses next to each other that are still interesting, more than saying like, let's do kind of a one-off villa. So let's have more. For that, Molly Claypool and I, my co-founder, started during COVID, very optimistic and extremely naive, this idea that we were going to build a technology company that was going to make a housing platform and that was going to build hundreds of thousands of homes. And you have to be really optimistic to do that. If with everything that I know now, 4 years down the line, I would never do that again. But it's truly very exciting to build this company. And this company brings me to a completely different framework of thinking about architecture. The question is not really kind of on that kind of really obsessive distribution of elements and compositions, but it's very much about how do we make an entirely new industrial model of little robot factories roaming around the world, building high-quality, sustainable housing at a lower cost than what is currently produced. And again, that idea of little robots roaming around is obviously also very archigrammy, you could say. And that is also has a historical reference, obviously. I think there's a lot of architects that go through this phase suddenly, usually not when they're young. Usually when they're a bit older, they're like, actually now it's about the really important things we're going to build, like housing, and we're going to scale. For example, obviously Walter Gropius, when he moved from Germany to the US, started the General Panel Corporation to build 10,000 homes a year out of timber. But is also the architect as the entrepreneur. So the architect that is so impatient, that does not want to wait for a commission, that doesn't want to wait for the world to change, and that just says like, I'm just going to start a company and I'm just going to do it. There's a lot of tragic stories around this as well, of course. But there's also these fantastic examples, Ray and Charles Eames, I know, and Alvar Aalto, Jean Prouvé, and Pihlak. or yes, the General Panel Corporation, which ultimately went down after having built only 200 homes, mainly for the employees of the factory. But it was a fantastic project. And it's interesting that actually this technology company founded by two architects, one architectural theorist and myself, right? Our core team was also a bunch of Bartlett architects. So obviously when we started this naively, we actually started it as an avant-garde architectural practice, building really strange installations in various places, investigating kind of models, what we said was going to change the way that we built housing through the lens of robots. So we built all these kind of speculative spaces, but somehow managed to attract the attention of ABB, which is the world's largest robots company, and actually sponsored the issue of Archigram. And from that, it went really fast. So now we are actually building hundreds of these homes, both in the United States and on the continent. Not yet in England, for some reason. England seems to be a difficult market, although we are based here. And that, again, provides a kind of for me, a really intellectually stimulating and strange world, where suddenly, when we talk about boring things and about pushing the kind of finding the interesting in the boring, that life is now occupied by trucks that have to ship robots and that have to pass customs and other trucks loaded with timber panels, etc., etc. And yes, I think when we talk about optimism, which is really the word of today, I think this is ultimately for me the kind of the intellectually really exciting question that you need to be an optimist, and it is ultimately the kind of the biggest question. And underlying that, and that's the kind of final image to conclude with, is this one of Ai Weiwei laying on one of his collections. And I think that's kind of ultimately where I would want to end up as an architect, to be in that really lazy position that you don't have to do anything. Your design is automated by AI, you have the robots building it, and you're just there, you know, laying on top of your collection and seeing it expand, right? So that's architecture in large quantities. So that's my contribution. Thank you so much.
I'll try and return slightly to the original proposition, which was that Archigram was, to some extent, an irritant as well as a vehicle for showing certain preferred things. So there's always this sort of dichotomy between saying, you know, come on, everybody, but also, since you haven't yet come on, here's some stuff which you can love, hate, or sideways. And that's why, in a way, I chose these three particular people. There are other people in the magazine who write and draw brilliantly, but don't necessarily do stuff. And I was, as some of you may remember, I'm very interested in stuff as well. As you know, without the stuff, it just turns back into academia. Although we're sitting in an academy, which we all, I think most of us know, some of us very well. And, you know, it used to be that certain key academies were where actually the ideas were coming. And I wonder, I'm not being only the oldest person in the room to say, well, it was different in my time. I wonder if they see their role as having changed and whether that's a good thing. I mean, there's several strands, I'm trying to put out some strands, which I hope you guys can pick up on, but you don't have to.
Okay, I don't have.
Okay.
I'm going to start somewhere else. Because we've been discussing today with Gilles, like what it is, what you're pulling out here, like what's the conversation about and why we're here. And I think it's very important, and I'm very grateful that Archigram has helped us or is pushing us to have architecture that is more joyful, playful, experimental, and in this very, one would say, in a rational world that we're in, either constructing or in academia. I think this experimental, joyful pleasure towards your creativeness is something that is connecting us, and I guess all of us who's part of part of this idea of making meaningful architecture. So I think in a way I'm also already going into towards the education and what education should be able to do. And I think the inspirational, motivational part of this is one of the most important parts, to get students inspired and motivated to experiment with space.
So as the dean of a school, what are you actually doing?
I wonder which answer to take here. Of course, there's a lot of there's a certain level of repetition. There's a certain level of I wouldn't say boringness, but there's something that needs to be motivated and activated every once in a while. And I think that's where you see the student work, or that's where you have those very fruitful conversations. So as a dean of architecture in Estonian Academy of Arts, I think it's all about the dialogue and with students and the way how they inspire me to think differently, and hopefully I can inspire them. And meanwhile,
I think I pick up on that. It certainly was in the heyday of Archigram. We were all teaching here, or in Upsala, and there was always something going on down the corridor that was smarter and more interesting what you were doing yourself. And that was a very edgy situation, and it was not exactly combative, but it kept you on the case. And I would like to think that that is one of the key things that schools do. You know, they can afford to make mistakes, actually. Another thing, just slightly tangentially occurs to me, is that in recent time, I mean, I'm actually, would you believe, involved in constructing something right now, which you will see in about 5 months' time. And the number of people who sit round the table or sit on the screen in a meeting, I can remember parallel objects that one might have come up with, where the meeting might have had 4 people involved in it. You know, somebody paying for it, somebody doing it, and a couple of people in between. Now there are about average 14 people for the same thing. And I noticed in an institution not distant from here that where somebody would, you know, I'd ring up and somebody would say, right, I'll come and chat next Thursday. And immediately Laura Allen, who's in the book, would make a poster in half an hour. It would go up in the gents' toilet, and people would come. Now they have a comms department of God knows how many people, you know, 24 people or what, and it doesn't produce anything anyway. And anybody who's involved in either building or academe, or, you know, I think the only thing, this is published by David, who I have to thank for digging me in the ribs and making it happen. And it's pretty much him and me and a graphic guy. And the graphic guy who obviously enjoyed himself. But I mean, it can, you know, and it's very strange. I think it's also part and parcel of everybody being scared. So instead of having one person who pays for it, one person who does it, and a couple of people who sort of operate in between, and if the bloke paying for it doesn't like it, he tells the other guy to fuck off. But now there are all these people who are all saying, well, it's actually this, and then they send another email trail. So I think that's also part of the same sort of nervous culture. What do you think?
What do I think? I don't know. No, I always have enjoyed to teach because I'm teaching since the 90s, at the beginning of the 90s. And even when I didn't want to go to the school, I was fed up of going there. I was coming back with a lot of energy because I always understood that I was giving to the students something and they were giving back more. So this is fantastic to be in a school. This is fantastic to be with students because you don't know that you are giving us a lot and you are providing us energy and to restart the day after. So this is why I continue when I created my school also. Even if I am not afraid, but worried about the question of the AI, as I said, but at the same time, I'm surprised by what they can do. And sometimes, and because my school is different of everything else, and we are not having courses, we just do projects, and we have just doing small, medium, and big size of projects. And because they are building, and they are not building, but they are making, and they understand how to learn by making. And this is really important today.
Maybe I want to pick up on some of the points, Peter, of like the sentiment that you're describing, right? And I just finished reading Patti Smith's book, Just Kids, which I had not read before. And one of the things that I was most struck by is like how uncomplicated life seemed to be in your era, or even a bit later, right? And that's the kind of I think the sentiment of the kind of logistical world that we live in is really, really present in universities and architecture schools. There's this concept by David Graeber that he calls bullshit jobs. It's people doing jobs without knowing why they do them. It's also the prime cause of burnout, actually. And he analyzed using a university in London, which is not UCL, it's a university more towards the east of London. And he analyzed that previously to do a school, you needed a teacher, a director, and an administrator. So if you want to do marks, you just like, as a teacher, you just put a number, you give it to the administrator, the student gets the mark. Today, you need 40 people to do that, right? So someone needs to check, the person who has checked the mark has done this. And like, that's a general thing, is that he then concludes that ultimately neoliberal capitalism results in more administration than communism, right? And we all kind of play in that. And universities are the kind of core, I would say, really like at the pinnacle of that, right? Like everything's complicated, everything's logistical. And that's actually why I really enjoy doing a technology startup, because if you talk about doing stuff, this is it, right? If you don't do it, you run out of money, you go bankrupt. And it's really like you develop much more knowledge, much faster, actually in the context of doing a technology startup and profoundly engaging in this weird world than doing anything else in a kind of academic context. So the provocation is hereby, if you want to practice true, meaningful avant-garde architecture, do a startup. Like that's the battleground.
But this is why I left the school that I was directing before. And I opened my own school, and we are only two.
It's a school as a startup. So.
And this is you have to leave the university. You have to build by yourself. You have to do whatever you want, and you can do it easily. You have to spend a lot of time, to spend a lot of money also, but this is not problematic. You do it, and as soon as you start, it goes. And we are only two for doing that,
But that's fantastic. So we should. I agree. Like the school,
but do it
new
by
schools
yourself.
as startups. Like
but
that's also perfect. Yeah.
Because if you want to start to establish your own factory or your own system, open your own school too. No more.
Next week.
Okay, next week.
If I was as young as you, I would start up one myself. I think in a funny way, there's a parallel there, because we've started up a funny old magazine again. Now, you might say everything's online. Why do you have a thing that costs $10 to mail to America? But it's partly symbolic, I think, and it's partly that in a way the internet has become too easy. Like anybody can put anything on there. It's devalued. And somehow the fact that somebody might give this to somebody for Christmas, or they might wrap their chips in it, I don't know, whatever. It's a leftover of another, trying to find some other mechanism to. It's really, my question to all of you is what next? What should we do? That's one suggestion, is start your own school. That's option number one. What other options?
I'm booked for the next 10 years trying to build 100,000 homes a year. So I'm busy.
No. I was busy and I did the school. You can do it. But you are a man, maybe. You don't have enough arms, maybe.
Yes.
Peter, what is so wonderful? You use the word cheerful.
Yes.
You use the word cheerful. And it gradually started to disturb me, because I was thinking it's not good enough, really. And because cheerful is something sort of slightly selfish and something, And I look for another word. I'm looking for another word. I was looking for the other word comes to mind is delight, delightful. And then the next speaker came on, and I thought, aha, there's light here, there's joy, and this is what I'm looking for. And I think aspiration is important. And dare I mention, when I say delightful, it doesn't take you long to get near the transcendental, the divine. Now, this usually frightens people. They think, God, for Christ's sake, don't mention God. And I'm not mentioning God. All I'm saying is the transcendental and the transcendence. I can't even mention that. I can't read, but the divine and the aspiration. And enthusiasm, God is in the word. These are very, very important things. And students bring that with them. They bring an aspiration and an enthusiasm to go somewhere. So may I suggest, Peter, that delightful is just the next, is Archigram 11.
I'll buy that. We'll put even bigger letters than the current word. I mean, I'm easily acquisitive. I don't mind being selfish sometimes either.
More questions?
More questions, yeah.
Here, one, and a third row.
Yeah, I like a lot of the language and the ideas that are coming out of this. It feels energetic and, you know, optimistic. And I just thinking back to Archigram, something that was particular about it that you haven't mentioned is that it really connected with, or it had an aspiration to connect with popular culture of the time more broadly, and to be part of a wider, you know, what was at the time a wider kind of optimistic, dynamic kind of spirit in fashion and music and other areas. So what would interest me is to know how this kind of new movement, if it's such a thing, could connect to the public, you know, and to connect with new areas of popular mass culture. I think that sort of, you know, the most dynamic areas of you know, innovative mass culture are not necessarily in the art world or the architecture world right now. Where do you think they are, and how can architecture reconnect with all of those people really making exciting, experimental, optimistic kind of work, whether that's music, film, digital, I don't know. Where do you think it is, and how can architecture be much more plugged in and connected to that?
This is a task of the students. Because, you know, when Archigram was, at the time of Archigram, it was a time where everything was changing and evolving very fast. It was after the Second World War. It was the world was opening. The consumption was starting to be, and etc. So it was a movement, and they were pushing the movement. But today, everything has been broken at the end of the 20th century. And now the task of the students, and this is why I'm talking to the students, is to invent the 21st century. This is their duty. They have to be able to dream and to think that they can dream, and they are allowed to dream first. And they have to be able to create the world, and then to propose something for the world. But not being and connected to everything. This is their duty, because when you look at students sometimes in some schools, they are really like with the eyes open and say, oh, like that. Okay, but they are not connected to the, some are connected to the music, some are connected to movies, some are connected to everything, but they don't know that they can do it, because this is a fault of the teachers and the architects especially. I'm very bad with the architects. Because architects become now today very boring. They are thinking that they have to create a world which is sustainable. Okay, we know that. They have to, that is to be feasible. Yes, okay, but we all think like that. This is just techniques. But where is the fashion? Where is the fascination? Where is the passion for architecture? When you listen to architects, they don't speak about that. They don't speak about the passion of architecture. That means something which is a place for people for living. And nobody talks about that.
I also have been wondering quite a lot about why, for example, art biennale in Venice is much more visited and much more known than architecture biennale, or why there's a lot of architects when they graduate. There's very little percentage who actually start constructing. There's a lot of them who, as the education, what we give them is quite holistic in a way that we tap into a lot of fields. I think the way how they start and looking at the world is also gives them more freedom of maybe dealing with other fields than constructing. But at the same time, it seems to me that there's certain shame in design. There's a certain frightness or people being afraid to actually work with the geometry, explore new spatial qualities, and propose experimental solutions, because we're more and more being sort of squeezed and framed by all the rules and standards that are given, and this freedom of wittiness or playful or graceful approach is somehow being sort of chamfered off, or it's becoming a really round one. I remember when first time when I was studying at Wolf Brick Studio in Angewand, the new sort of group of masters came in from New York, and they said, like, what have you been doing here? This is a car crash geometry. This is no geometry that follows any rules, any standards. Like, what's the mathematical system behind that? And at that time, I was afraid, like maybe I've been taught wrong, but actually more and more I understand that there has to be this proposal for different, for a change, proposal for new spaces, new experiments, and even if it's a car crash geometry, I think it's fine to start with that in order to arrive to something more meaningful.
I think maybe just quickly to Vicky's point, because I think it's such an interesting and really difficult question. And like the only thing I would say is, like, as architects, try to talk about architecture with people who are not architects. That's the very first test. Like, there's this famous one, like, and it works for also for things that are not architectures. Like, if you want to try and like explain something to someone, like, think how you would explain it to your parents, right? And if they get excited about your idea, you're onto something good, right? And I think that's really the key, like, for any architecture student, to not talk to other architects. It's dangerous, right? It's a rabbit hole. And that's really like the discourse we produce is not to be consumed by non-architects. That's the reality. We got so kind of isolated in a world that our architectural ideas are of very little interest to the rest of the world. And to be optimistic, the interesting thing is actually that there's never been more need for architecture than today, right? We need to build 2 billion new homes. We need to renovate millions of homes in Europe. We need to fight the climate crisis. So it's all there, right? There's never been more need for architecture than today. But there's also never been, I think, a kind of a situation where architecture has been kind of as marginalized and sidelined, and a kind of lack of actually optimistic, inspiring visions that non-architects find extremely exciting, right? And like, I've been through this because to start my tech company, I had for the very first time ever to talk about architectural ideas with investors, right? And you need to get those people excited, and it's possible, you can do it, right? So that would be my core teaching to like any architecture student today, is like, don't talk to other architects.
Another question?
Still a very elitic field. And compared to music or to theater, to literature, most of the general public would not know about architecture. And who should have the role to make this of a really general culture? Because I think what I feel on the earlier Archigram with the sensibility, the cartoon, there was also this desire to make it open, to break this boundary that it is this elitic knowledge most of the people don't know. And who should take that role? Is it the school? Is it that is to stop that?
This is why I think that School of Architecture is not done for doing architects. They are not professional studies. Studying architecture is something else. It's a discipline, it's a culture, and you propose that to the students, and they build themselves with that, and they can do whatever they want. We don't have to educate students to become professional architects. This is not the role of School of Architecture. This is just educating them in architecture, which is totally different. Bringing the fields of art, bringing the fields of music, the fields of cinema, everything inside to give them the opportunity to do whatever they want and to build themselves. I don't believe in schools of architecture. This is why I left the School of Architecture, because I want to do something else. And I think that the people who can do that are the students, if they are passionate by what they are doing. And to be passionate, they need to have not teachers, but coach that provide them the possibility to bring from themselves something which is interesting. And also, when you said that, I was thinking, I said to my students yesterday that maybe they have to watch the movie Brutalist. Have you heard about this movie?
Yes, but that's why I
didn't see it already because it was not out in Paris until tonight. But I will look at that. And I told them, look at that because I think that there is something in it.
I have to warn you, the designs are really bad, so it's painful to watch.
Okay, it's modernist and brutalist. Okay, that doesn't matter. We're talking about architecture. This is the first time that we talk again in a movie about an architect and architecture.
With some.
So why not? Why not
going
to the
it's
TV?
about opening
why
up.
Not doing
I think
the program?
That film raised the issue that is actually because not a general knowledge. What is, and you can criticize like this, all sort of criticism, or people that are passionate about it. Is the issue that is still something that general public don't know. And
no, because they don't know what we are doing.
Yes, but why? Because
we don't talk about what
power?
we are doing.
Why? Why is not general knowledge?
I think we have time for one really good question as well.
No pressure.
I think we're still just warming up, but we're supposed to finish at 8 o'clock, and the magazines are on sale, and the new version of the Archigram Big Book, which is now Archigram slightly smaller Big Book, in that room over there. But I think we're just creeping towards throwing out the gauntlet to the student body. It should be somebody sitting out there who produces not necessarily a thing like this, but whatever, or a blog, or a film, or an explosion, or a giant, inflatable rhinoceros, if that might do the trick. I mean, of course, you can say I'm a period person. Immediately, I think of inflatable rhinoceroses as being slightly more interesting than a sort of well photographed movie. But the gauntlet has to go out there, and I think that just if I can go back into memory lane, one other thing. When we produced the first archigrams, it spawned a series of imitation publications and counter publications which didn't like it. So there's a thing called Arse, there was a thing called Street Farmer. There were things in many coming out of Florence, some of which were good and some of which were a bit tedious, and then out of Austria. I mean, it started. Its imitators. I don't think whether they ever exceeded it. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But the point is, it started some sort of tiny vortex. Now, the thing about being popular, I can't tell you what it is, but I will be producing something in this town which will be visible in opening on the 10th of June. But I can't tell you what it is. I'm not allowed to. But that will be at least a personal statement of cheerfulness. and you will know about it when it's allowed to be. More I cannot personally say. Whether there will be an Archigram 11, maybe not. I'd like to think that if there was a parallel to it in any way, it should be edited by somebody else. It should contain completely different people. And whether there's ever going to be any money for it, who knows? But I would also borrow an idea that was set up for something a long time ago, where each of the people in the present Archigram nominates somebody else, younger or whatever, to make the next one, if there is. That's just one suggestion I have. Thank you for coming. We are very keen on you purchasing the Archigram because it's hasn't any money, and it's cheaper tonight than if you go down to it and order it. Even I'm selling now, salesman. It's cheaper than Amazon tonight, I think. I can't say fairer than that. Thanks for coming.